Welcome to the Fine Cooking Podcast, the show for people who love to cook. I'm Kathy Kingsley, your host. Each episode will be bringing the pages of Fine Cooking magazine to life through our conversations with a mix of guests, our editors, contributors, cookbook authors, food writers, chefs, and bakers. We'll dive into a topic and then take time at the end of every show to answer some of your questions. Today's episode is on project cooking. Joining me today are editors Chris Hulk, Diana Andrews, and we'd also like to welcome a guest to our show, Vallery Lomas, a blogger, food writer, and also the winner of the Great American Baking Show. Welcome, Vallery. If you've ever made pasta from scratch or ricotta or jam, or even maybe cured your own salmon, these are what we refer to as cooking projects. It's those kitchen endeavors that take a little time, but not necessarily a lot of skill. And for those of us who love to cook, we also love doing these projects, especially this time of year when staying home is sometimes forced upon us due to bad weather. But before we jump into discussing some of our favorite projects, let's do our What We're Cooking Now roundup, where we go around the table kind of talking about what we've cooked or eaten lately that we thought was interesting. So, Chris, would you like to start us off on that?
After so many people on staff have been enjoying working with their multi-cookers, I've dragged my multi-cooker out of retirement, and I've been having a great time just cooking bean things.
Oh, what'd you make? Did you say you made rice and beans the other day?
I made rice and beans the other day, and when I told my family that dinner would be ready in 20 minutes, they didn't believe it. I started with dried beans that I had soaked, so they had soaked for 8 hours, but they said, oh, there's no way it's going to be ready. And in the time it took me to dice an avocado and a mango to garnish it, we were sitting down to eat, and they were like, oh, you weren't kidding. So
yeah, the pressure cooker is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and then the next day I used the other half of the bag of black beans and made black bean soup. So
did you soak them this time?
I did.
You did?
Yeah. It seems like, at least for black beans, the recipes that I keep looking at seem to want you to soak them.
Yeah. I think my experience has been it's better if you soak them before you use them in the pressure cooker too. So Vallery, welcome. How about you? What's something you've cooked or eaten lately?
Yeah, so something I cooked recently was Julia Child's Boeuf Bourguignon. It had been on my cooking,
classic.
My cooking bucket list for probably close to 8 or 9 years, and I finally, now that I had some time because it's winter and it's cold, and I just decided to do it, and I spent an entire afternoon, and I finally made it.
And it, I'm sure, was up to your expectations, right?
Oh yeah, it was,
or beyond.
It was pretty good. I didn't use a pressure cooker, so it was a slow process. I used a Dutch oven, actually one of my favorite parts of the recipe wasn't the beef itself, but it was the slowly caramelizing the pearl onions. Wow.
Did you use fresh pearl onions?
Yes.
Wow. So you peeled them all?
Oh. Well, I did not peel them myself. They were already peeled.
Oh, they did. Okay.
But I did buy them at a market, and they just really added such a flavor punch
because they're kind of sweet.
Bite. Yeah, just delicious.
Isn't it neat when you can go to the supermarket and buy something pre-peeled like that in a clamshell and not have to worry about?
Oh yeah, because peeling them is such a task.
It's a chore.
Yeah. And how about you, Diana?
Well, I've been eating grain bowls lately, and that's mostly so that I could feel a little bit better about pulling the leftovers out of my refrigerator. So like a Sunday night, I'll make a big bucket of grains, whatever. This week it's been winter wheat berries. And during the week when you come home from work and you're exhausted and the last thing you want to do is cook, I just kind of pull out what I have in my refrigerator and chop it up and add it to the grain bowl. So sometimes it's definitely a base of salad greens, always, maybe some cherry tomatoes or some leftover greens that I had from the night before. Top it with a nice dressing, and then always an egg. Sorry about that, because that egg adds such nice, beautiful flavor once the yolk is kind of oozing into the rest of the ingredients. And I find that it's easy to prepare, and I don't have to think that much about it. And I'm also using my leftovers in a way that it doesn't feel like it's like used food. you know?
Yeah, it's kind of its own recipe
Definitely.
almost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So actually, this is a dish that I had out at a restaurant, not something I made that, it's one of those dishes that you go home and you're still thinking about later. It was at Nishi, which is one of David Chang's Momofuku restaurants, which has the Italian-Asian blend. And he made this bucatini cacio e pepe that was vegan. And so the cheese, instead of cheese, he used chickpea miso. And the noodles were made with rye flour, so they had a really interesting flavor, which paired with the miso like perfectly, and then a really great texture. I mean, it was so delicious. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say I was thinking about it later that day. I was thinking about it even the next day. And it was vegan, which was even an extra little bonus in that you feel really good about eating it.
Would you have guessed it was vegan when you were eating it?
No, not at all. No, because the chickpea miso is so got so much depth of flavor that I mean, you didn't miss the cheese in it at all. Anyway, quite inventive. So anyway, now we get into our main section, and we're going to talk about some of our favorite cooking projects, which around here is a great conversation that we seem to have all the time. So we just want to welcome Vallery again to the show. And Vallery, we know you won the Great American Baking Show. Before you tell us your favorite project, tell us a little bit about being on the show. What is it that you made that won the episode for you?
Sure. So for the finale, I had to make a tower of 3 different plated desserts. So I made a pecan candy cheesecake, pecan candy because I'm from Louisiana, and it was fun to kind of blend that with where I live now, which is New York, and make something that represented both of those places. Yeah.
Yes.
Another dish I made was an eggnog millefeuille.
Interesting. So the eggnog was the
pastry cream.
The pastry cream.
Yeah.
Yum.
And for the puff pastry, I actually did an inverted puff pastry, which I felt like I was taking a risk because it's really tricky to work with, but it yields just such a flaky puff pastry once it bakes. It's really nice, and the fork just pierces straight through it. Yeah. And the last thing I made was a choux pastry with a lemon curd filling.
And so when you say tower, you actually stack these things?
Yeah, it was actually like a very large, probably like 3 feet high, like pyramid shaped tower that we put the plated desserts on, and actually just carrying that from my workstation up to the judges, I thought the whole thing could end then.
Oh
like
my
the
gosh.
fact that I made it like without it kind of like toppling over, like I felt like I had already won just by getting that giant tower up there.
Yikes, no kidding. Especially because I'm sure you were nervous.
Oh yeah, I'm sure I was shaking.
So that is a project in itself, what you're just discussing. And I'm sure it was all delicious.
What was your time limit on that?
We had 5 hours. Yeah.
And were you alone, or do you have an assistant?
Oh, we were alone. But I will say, in like the last 10 minutes or so, I was really wondering if I was going to get everything plated. And the other 2 contestants were kind of wrapping it up with a few minutes to go, and they actually helped me plate my dessert.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
And they were like helping me count to make sure I had the right number on there. So,
that is really
I mean,
nice to hear.
It really is like a friendly competition in the sense that you develop a camaraderie with everyone.
Sure.
And I just think that's with people who love food and who like to bake.
Yep.
It's not like a competitive thing in that sense. Like if you see someone,
Exactly.
You want
It's
to
more
help
about
them.
sharing
It's exactly
than competing. Yeah.
Right.
That's the way it should be anyway.
Yeah, I think people who bake, you bake because you want to share that experience with other people. So.
Exactly.
We know that from Chris because he shares a lot of his baked goods with us, and we're all happy and 10 pounds heavier because of that.
So is there another project that you like to do other than baking, or are your projects mostly baking focused?
I mean, it's interesting because, at the time having a full-time job, baking was that
yes, let me
outlet
just
for
add,
me.
Valerie's an attorney.
Yes.
This is just her side gig.
Right.
And
Baking was that outlet for me, but once the baking kind of picked up and got a little more intense, I decided I needed like another outlet that was a little more carefree. So I ordered a keyboard because I grew up playing piano. So now I have a keyboard in my little New York apartment that I pull out from time to time and
to de-stress.
Yeah, and that really helps also. But I mean, baking, it is my happy place. So.
Yeah. So Chris, what's your latest project you've been working on? Or
for me, like Valerie, baking is projects, and really kind of depending on what I'm feeling motivated to make determines the depth of involvement in the project. Because I also have a huge cookbook problem.
In that you acquire too many?
I have too many cookbooks. So I'll pull things off the shelf and be like, oh, I haven't used this one in a while. Or even worse, I pull it off the shelf and go, I've never made anything from this book. But I recently have been rediscovering Allison and Matt Robicelli's cupcake cookbook. And, I say the words cupcake cookbook and you think, oh, cupcakes, what's the big deal? But their cupcakes are
a project.
These remarkable projects where there's a cupcake and a filling and a French buttercream and frequently some sort of topping, whether it's the one that I've kind of in the middle of working on now is a maple apple crisp cupcake. So there's an apple cupcake and there's an apple butter filling, and I made the apple butter from scratch. And then there's a maple oat topping that you make from scratch and crumble on top of the cupcake. I mean, it's the garnish, but you sit there and look at it's a cupcake, but it's this massive project that I'm stretching out over a week to get them done.
This one particular type of cupcake?
This one cupcake.
Because it's all these different layers. But then when you bite into it and you get all of that, that's the great thing about a cupcake. You get it all together in one bite. And yeah. Okay.
And,
that sounds very good.
Like baking is like, as I'm sure you all know, I mean, it's full of projects, whether it can be as simple as a cupcake or making a loaf of bread, or making croissant or,
Yeah, croissants, there's another great project. Love making those. But, you need to really set aside an entire day to do it. And that's why winter is such a great time to do these things, especially when it's snowing out and you just have to be in the house anyway. And then you start kind of getting into these things that take all day.
When I was in cooking school, I always used to think making like stock was a great thing to do.
Yeah.
An indoor winter project.
Yeah. Always good to have that on hand.
Right, and then you can freeze that.
I've actually done that, and I actually have used it, which is shocking to me, because you know how you put things away in your freezer and forget about them?
But we know that you've taken control of your freezer.
I have taken control of my freezer, so I that's why I use the stock, because there it was on my list. What's in my freezer? There it was.
Yes, Diana has a list of everything in her freezer tacked on the front of so she knows.
Crazy.
Which, is a really good idea.
But
so how about you,
crazy,
besides using the stock from your freezer?
For me, it's my tartine bread, which is really basically a sourdough boule, which I learned from one of our food stylists.
She gave you some starter?
She gave me some starter, and it kind of went from there. And I knew it was going to be a commitment. So I wasn't really going to focus on it. I thought I'd try it one day, one time, and see what happened. But it is really a 2-week process, because the starter has to be fed.
2 weeks? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, pretty much. The starter is fed I'm just finishing the starter that I'm working on now. I've been feeding it for about 2 weeks, and it has to kind of look a certain way. Then the levain you make overnight, and then the bread, kind of folding the bread on and over itself is like probably a 4-hour process. In 30-minute increments, you kind of just pull and fold. And, then you kind of have to let it rest a little bit, and then there's a rising, and it's all these steps. And by the time you're done, it can take an entire day, but the result is really, really lovely. So now I've learned that.
Have you perfected it?
I think I have. I really think I have. I really like a tangy sourdough. So now I put them in the bread baskets with those beautiful concentric circles.
Do you use the razor on the top?
I do. But I let them sit in the refrigerator probably for 2 days, and then they get even tangier. And it's just like pop them in the oven a couple days later, and out come these beautiful bowls. I gave many away this Christmas. I made 6 and gave them away as gifts, and people were really happy with them. But I never thought I'd keep going with this, but it's such a satisfying project. But again, you have to do it on a snowy day or a miserable day or a day when you know you're going to be inside, because you really need to pay attention to it. It's like every 30 minutes you have to go and fold the dough. So you can't just leave it.
Yeah, well, it's alive.
It is. It sure is.
Yeah, it is. It's like creating a little baby almost, right? That you love. And it's probably even hard for you to give them away.
It is, but you know what? I feel like people love them so much. It's so satisfying for me because I've always wanted to make bread like this. And I started with Jim Leahy's bread, but this is kind of even more of a commitment. It's a really big commitment. And once you taste it, you're hooked. I mean, there's just nothing like this. To make fresh bread
Real
like this at home, it's incredible.
So how do you like to eat it? Do you slather with butter?
Well,
do you use olive oil?
I do put it out with the grain bowl I spoke about earlier, and that nice egg where we just kind of like dip the bread into the egg and gosh. So
that sounds
toasted
good.
is really good with butter too.
Yeah, well, maybe someday you'll be bringing us a little.
I will. You won't have it for another week or so, depending on the day.
Process.
It's a big process. Yeah.
Oh, I look forward to tasting it because
Okay.
I am a real sourdough lover.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, I love it. And it's hard to find good sourdough bread.
It is. It really is. Do you like it really tangy though?
I love it tangy.
You do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then this is a good bread for you.
So one of the projects I was just recently had done in it, I did it with a group of people that was a lot of fun, was making sushi rolls. And it was actually at a party. And it turned out to be a really great kind of participation event for everybody. They're not difficult to make, obviously. You just need some to make the rice ahead, the sticky rice, and then you season it with vinegar and let it cool. And then get some ultra fresh fish, some vegetables. You don't necessarily need one of the bamboo mats. What are they called? The makasu mats for rolling the sushi. But if you are going to roll it with the rice on the outside, you definitely need one of those. And then you put the saran wrap down first, and then you put the nori down. So you start with the sheets of nori, spread the rice on it, and then what you do is you flip it over so the rice is on the saran wrap. And then you roll it with the mat and it doesn't stick. So that works well. But if you're going to put the nori on the outside of it, you almost can do it without one of those mats. But what was really interesting was there was someone at this party who was talking about, why don't we try, there was a charcuterie platter, and they were like, why don't we try making it with prosciutto and little red pepper and basil and making an Italian sushi? So we were all game for that, which I have to say was absolutely delicious, which got us thinking about all the other great things you could do that make them really unusual, and what a fun party that would be if you told everybody that they needed to bring items to put into the sushi that aren't your standard Asian ingredients, right? And so someone said, I had one once that was with peanut butter and jelly. That was really good.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
And someone else was saying, what about Nutella and banana? And I was like, okay, well, that one's right up my alley.
Dessert sushi.
Bacon and egg. You could do breakfast sushis. Someone else was talking about just even barbecue beef. So, I mean, you can really take it in a lot of different directions. But kind of fun, not just a solo project, though, but you could, do that with a group of people. And I know, Vallery, you and I were talking earlier, too, that you were also experimenting to making a lot of caramel lately, right?
Yeah. I was just talking earlier. I made caramel for the first time about 5 months ago, and it really is a fun project because it's something that you don't normally make, but you can make it start to finish in like 20 minutes or so.
And a lot of people are afraid to make caramel.
Right. I understand. I was one of those people.
How'd you get over your fear?
I got over my fear because I had to. It was actually part of the final technical challenge of the Great American Baking Show. The recipe called for caramel. So I had never made it before. And, when you're in a position like that, you just sometimes you just read the directions and do it. And it's funny because the directions are actually missing some of the key steps. So now when I'm making it, I feel like, I have all of the ingredients, I have all of the steps, like I can do this. And it's just fun experimenting with it and kind of like pushing it and
seeing.
You
were saying you tried to push it to the limit to see how far you could take it, right?
Exactly. So I made like a really like almost cinnamon colored caramel, and it was so rich and complex, and it paired really nicely with like a really dark chocolate that I had mixed it with.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah, it was.
That's one of my favorites.
Well, Chris is getting excited listening to this because, I'm sure, Chris, you've made tons of caramel.
Yeah, caramel, it's such a satisfying thing to do because, like you said, it doesn't take that long. But when you get to that point where it's done, you're like, oh, I did this. This is great.
Yeah, and I poured it through a sieve and I watched it just kind of like melt into this glass jar, and it was just so luxurious and rich and delicious.
And you have to like really, really hold yourself back because you cannot taste it at that point.
Right.
Because it's so hot.
Exactly.
You do have to hold yourself back. It is really hard,
Yeah.
too, because you just want to put your finger in it, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the uses that you've found that you like it for?
I mean, I've tried folding it into ice cream. And for that, I do want something a little more closer to like a traditional caramel color, not something that's a little bit darker than that. So just folding it into ice cream, that was delicious. I'm just kind of playing it around. I think I'm going to drizzle some on cupcakes and see how that goes.
When you're drizzling onto ice cream, chocolate ice cream with a little flaky sea salt on top. Think about that. That's my favorite combination.
Diana, that is my favorite
I am
combination,
telling you,
too.
the dark chocolate, caramel, and the flaky sea salt. Can't go wrong ever.
I'm just curious for everyone here, what project type cooking thing is on your bucket list that you haven't done? For you dealt with caramel, but what else is there for each of you that you haven't done yet that you want to try?
Well, that's a good question,
Haven't
Chris.
ever done?
Yeah, that you haven't done.
Oh, okay.
Like on our bucket list of projects. I got to think on that for a minute.
For me,
what
it's
is yours?
puff pastry.
Yeah.
I still never made puff pastry
Really?
from scratch.
You would enjoy that.
I know. When I get to it, it's going to be like an amazing, satisfying thing. But I still kind of can't believe I haven't quite gotten to it yet.
But have you made croissants?
I have made croissants.
Yeah, so puff pastry is like the easier version of croissants.
Yeah. It's easier. Exactly.
I just love like folding the dough and laminating the dough. Like puff pastry to me is one of like the most relaxing types of baking projects. And croissants, like they're just a little bit trickier.
The shaping is the
shaping,
thing.
Yeah.
Someone told me in France, a croissant that uses pure butter is not curled. It's not that moon shape. It's straight.
Right.
That's how you tell the difference. And the ones that are using a butter blend or like butter cut with margarine or whatever are shaped like a croissant shape.
A crescent versus
crescent.
the like au naturel
yeah,
shape.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting to distinguish the two, which I thought was...
that is interesting.
Yeah.
I really want to do curing. I haven't really done that. I know we have some recipes in the magazine for cured salmon, one from Marcus Samuelson that was really delicious. And I know there's a gravlax recipe. So I would say that is on my bucket list for doing. Yeah.
I want to make a croquembouche.
Well, now that you have caramel, you're halfway there.
I've got choux pastry mastered. I've got caramel. I've got pastry cream. It's just a matter of like assembling it into something grand and spinning some sugar to go around it.
Oh, yeah.
That sounds like fun.
That is a grand thing to do. This holiday, I think you should do it. How about you, Diane? Anything on your list of things?
I'm thinking, but it's hard for me because of working in the test kitchen. I get to do so many different things all the time.
Well, one of my bucket list things we did in the test kitchen was making burrata.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now I feel like I don't really need to do that at home.
Right.
Because we made it so many times in the test kitchen and it was delicious. Oh my gosh.
You get tired of
respect
things
the
like that
process.
after a while.
I do respect it. I mean, it was
exactly.
There's nothing like fresh made burrata. I'm not sure I would. I mean, it wasn't difficult.
It wasn't difficult, but you just have to be patient.
It's patience, yeah.
And it's also, you have to be willing to try it a few different times, because the burrata comes, like really filling the burrata with the cream and all, that comes with a lot of practice. So you may not get the most beautiful burrata if it's homemade at first, but if you keep trying, you sure will.
Yeah, it's so delicious. Well, anyway, that sort of wraps up our kind of main segment on our favorite cooking projects. One thing I just wanted to add, Vallery has a website called Foodie in New York.
Yes.
So be sure to visit that. She also has a great Instagram page. So thank you, Vallery. Okay, so we have a couple questions from readers today, and actually 2 of them have to do with cleaning appliances, which I think I'm always looking for advice on. So, and I'm sure Diana has some. The first is, I use my blender a lot, but I hate cleaning it. Any tips on how to make cleaning it a bit easier?
That's always a challenge, and what we do now, and really, really cuts the cleaning time down remarkably. I just usually rinse the blender out a little bit with warm water, and then I fill it about halfway full again with warm water, and I put a drop or two, only a drop or two, of liquid detergent in, the dishwashing liquid. Mm-hmm. And then I put the blender back on its the top.
The motor?
The motor, and put the top on and just blend it on high for just a few seconds, and that really loosens all the debris and stuff caught under the blade. And then you can just pour it out into the sink and just rinse it, and all the stuff stuck on the bottom and under the blade, which is the most difficult to remove, kind of comes free.
Great tip.
And then you don't cut your fingers
You
on
don't
the
cut your
blade.
fingers on the blade, exactly.
And the next one is, how about cleaning a spice grinder, which I have also and would like to clean.
That's also another interesting tip. You get take a piece of any kind of moist sliced bread, and you could put about 3/4 of a slice in the grinder, and then put the cap on and just run it. And the moisture in the bread starts to pick up all the residue of the spices left in the bowl.
So just slightly moist, right? Otherwise it would gunk up and stick to the blade.
You don't want to add any water or anything like that. Just a moist piece of sliced, just a bagged sliced bread.
Just you don't even have to add water to if you use
water.
A slice of sandwich bread, right?
Exactly. Sandwich bread would be perfect.
Okay, well, I will be trying that in this tonight, maybe. Okay, the next question is, and this is always a perennial one, sometimes the lemons I buy at the supermarket are so dry. Any tips for getting maximum juice out of them?
I always say one of the citrus squeezers are really great to have, but before putting them into the squeezer, I like to roll the fruit back and forth on the counter, pressing pretty hard with the heel of your hand. And it softens the fruit because you're crushing the juice cells inside the fruit. Also, before cutting them in half or cutting them at all, you can put them in the microwave and zap them for 25 seconds or so before squeezing them. If you do have a citrus squeezer, you can cut off both ends, the little tips, and then slice the lemon in half crosswise, and then put it into the squeezer, and you'll find you'll get more juice because you've cut off those little tips at the end. It really is amazing how much more juice comes out of the lemon when you're doing all those things.
Wow, so cutting off the tips makes a big difference?
It does.
That I did not know.
Because you're actually squeezing it without that, that little tip on, which kind of prevents the squeezer from pressing down completely into the
maximizing the lemon.
Exactly.
See, I learn something in these segments all the time. That's our show for this week. Thanks for listening. Join us again on our next podcast. For some of the recipes and projects that we talked about today, visit our website, finecooking.com, and be sure to join the Fine Cooking Podcast group on Facebook.